While I was in Germany, one of my commanders was Colonel Skip Sadler. He was absolutely a wonderful commander, and I really appreciated working for him. There's some information on the internet about him, and I've set up a Find a Grave site for him. And it has a picture of him and tells something about his career. But I remember I usually would jump behind him when we would go on an airborne operation. And somehow, I don't know how he did it, when he got in the door, I guess he reached down in his pocket and got it. He would have about a 2-inch cigar that was stuck between his teeth. And when he'd stand up in the door, the wind would just make that cigar vibrate. And I'd always sort of laugh about it before I went out of the door, but that was his trademark. One of the big operations that we went on was called Deep Furrow 68, and it was a plan to jump in Greece. And we were to have 300 Greek paratroopers as well as we had about 900 that were going to go on the operation, our artillery, our battalion, and so forth. But he had full complement went down. We flew down to Greece. We marshaled between Athens and Corinth, near the town of Corinth, which is in the Bible, the Corinthians. And there we stayed for a couple of days. I remember the chaplains, we had a Catholic chaplain and a Protestant chaplain with us, came to me one day and said, we'd like to go visit Corinth to learn about what's there. And I said, have you got a vehicle? He said, yes, we've got a ride down there. And I said, okay, well, go today. And so they took off for the day. I really envy them. I'd like to have gone on that trip too. Anyway, we did some preparations that day. Our operation was to fly north, and we had about 50 aircraft. There were 20 jump aircraft, C-130s, and we had a large number of heavy lift aircraft. The aircraft that dropped our artillery, our 3/4-ton trucks, our Jeeps, all of that. And we had about 30 of those. And each of those airplanes would carry 3 to 4 vehicles or heavy loads. Sometimes it'd be water, gasoline, rations, whatever we were dropping, but most of it was the vehicles. Anyway, we flew north to Thessalonica, and then we turned east and flew out right near the town of Philippi, the Church of the Philippians. We had traveled airborne, Paul's route of travel in the Bible for those churches. We jumped, and we operated there for about a week, I guess. I remember when we drew up the manifest of the order of jumps and so forth, the Greek unit commander was to jump. Colonel Sadler had him jump right behind him, Sadler first, then the Greek battalion commander, and then I jumped. Colonel Sadler was sort of apologizing to me for moving me back. He was really a wonderful guy, and I really enjoyed working for him. And he had such a career. If you ever read about him, he came in World War II, got his commission through an Australian officer training corps. Just a lot of things that made his career interesting. And at that time, he was just as full of energy as he could be. I thought the guy was really wonderful. But anyway, we operated there for about a week, and then we moved back to Thessalonica, where we were to leave out, flying back to Germany. I sent a lieutenant ahead. As the vehicles would come in, he would manifest them, putting 3 or 4 vehicles on and 30 or 40 troops, whatever the plane could take, and he was keeping up with it and doing a great job. We could only send 1 plane back an hour. France would only let 1 plane come across their territory 1 hour, and it's always a troublesome ally to me in that regard. So it took a long time to get home. Well, we got all the troops together, got everybody. I was on the last vehicle, last plane that left Greece, and I was really tired. And I remember when we got on the plane, I asked the crew chief, I saw a stretcher hanging sort of in the roof of the plane, and I said, after we get in the air, you mind if I climb up in that stretcher and sleep? And he said, no, that'd be fine, sir. So I did that, and I fell asleep. And that trip, which was probably 4 or 5 hours, I was just out of it. I didn't know anything until they started punching the stretcher and telling me that I needed to come down and strap in because they were getting ready to land at Rhine, Maine. So it was a very successful operation. And by the way, we had briefed it in advance. And Colonel Sadler and I had gone to the generals of Europe, and many of the generals of Europe, Lyman Lemons and so forth, were there also watching the operation, since it was a sort of a NATO. It was a NATO operation, since we had Greek and American forces. I remember that after we got back to Germany, we wrote an after-action report. And one of the things that had gone very badly on this was that the heavy drop aircraft, they gave us a certain order that they were coming across in. And we would tell the soldier that the number 6 plane to come across and the second load out will be your Jeep. And so they knew exactly when the plane came over and they would go to that load, watch it land, and then go to it and de-rig it, get it, and drive the vehicle away. Well, the Air Force, for some reason, changed the order of vehicles, not realizing what damage they were doing to us. Because then we had, when the soldiers who were getting ready to pick up their vehicles on the drop zone had no idea. There were just a lot of loads down, and people were yelling, trying to figure out where the right load was. So I wrote up a pretty negative after-action report about the performance of that element of the aircraft. Otherwise, it was good. But those people changing the order of these things had really caused us a lot of problems before we moved out. I remember that it went in, and then I left, heading home, heading to Vietnam next. And Colonel Sadler got a letter from the Air Force, kind of upset. And he said, well, that was sent by my S3. He's in Vietnam. You can contact him and ask him about it. So anyway, while I was in Vietnam, I got a letter asking, I explained what had happened on the operation that caused so much problem. Colonel Sadler knew lots of people around the military, and he had arranged things so that I would stay there for the operation. And then what would happen is I would go to the 82nd Airborne in Vietnam, and then I would come back and attend the Armed Forces Staff College before I went on to my next assignment. So he had talked to the right people and gotten it all figured out, and everything seemed set. Before we left, Colonel Sadler gave us a really nice party at the Officers Club, a going-away party. And he was so honoring Emily, honoring myself, and we appreciated it so much. And then the next day or so, Chaplain Bell and his wife drove us to, I've forgotten where it was, but we caught a train. And we took the train across France. I remember looking out of the window and seeing the Eiffel Tower. And I believe we went to Le Havre. They asked, would you want air transportation or surface transportation? So I put it down surface, thinking, I'll probably be some military ship, but it'll be a little longer with family, Emily and Vanessa, before I have to leave. The ship I was on was the liner United States. I knew that before I got there, but it was superb. It was the fastest ship to cross the Atlantic Ocean at the time. It had the speed record of crossing as fastest. Well, they weren't speeding back, but we had a wonderful time. Formal events, all kind of activities, movies we went to, shows that we had. And so we had a nice event before I departed to go to Vietnam. I remember coming into New York, the three of us stood up on the deck and looked out at the Statue of Liberty as we came in. As we docked, I looked down, and on the pier was my car. They had really treated these people riding the liner United States well, and somehow my car had been taken out of the port and brought over there so that I would have it. I guess because many times there were general officers that came back. My car was there, and so we got in the car and were able to depart down for Richmond and Columbus.